right. Good morning, everybody. Today is Monday, May 22nd, 2017. And this is Before the First Cup with Jules here on UCY.tv. Happy Monday, everyone. It is a lovely 63 degrees and beautifully sunny here in upstate New York. So where do we leave off Friday? We titled the show Hawaii DOD Frequencies, Brain, Energy, Weapons, and Bio Effects. We had spent the entire week last week looking at different ways we could manipulate the brain, not only through different frequencies, which we've looked at extensively in a 2-week stint a few months ago before, but we also were exploring bacteria over the last week or so, precision medicine, genetic engineering, and some of the strange things that they've been doing to bacteria, and then that direct connect through the vagus nerve from your gut with the microbiome and the bacteria that naturally live in your gut to the effects that it can cause on the brain. We've found out that they are developing what they're calling quote-unquote living therapeutics, where they can genetically modify bacteria and insert things and flip switches that then can go in and not only diagnose, but therapeutically fix things going on inside of your body. And some of the stories we've read, it's been pretty disturbing. And we found there was a story that we covered bits and pieces of it on a few different shows last week called PSYOP to Neural War. This was a PDF that came out of a conference from 2014. And I want to continue a little bit on this vein and make some more connections between what is really happening, who is involved in this, and share with you some really, really disturbing stories that Camille brought to my attention last week that I must have missed when we were on spring break with the kids. My sister was in town and my dad had a birthday and there was all kinds of stuff going on. So that week I was off and I really wasn't paying a lot of attention to what was going on in the news. But oh my goodness, we got problems, Clyde. All right, so back to this presentation that was given at a conference. I don't remember where it was, but it was in 2014 in regards to different things that the military is investing in to be able to manipulate our thought processes and our actions, our behaviors, invading our brain from many different perspectives. This next section is titled The Growth of Military Neuroscience. And we found out that the U.S. has put all kinds of money into investing in startups in neurotechnology in partnerships between the U.S. and Israel. And Israel is very far deep into the study of neuroscience and finding out ways to manipulate the brain. Remember, Israel is another one of those offshore mad science gone mad facilities that we fund and we work with, where things can happen kind of on the QT, under the covers, until they are brought back into this country, and then they find ways to pass bills and fund additional projects to aid in the development of these offshore technologies. February 2013, we had Obama come out with the BRAIN Initiative, putting hundreds of millions of dollars into neuroscience research through the National Science Foundation to be able to find ways, of course, to cure, quote unquote, diseases or traumas that our soldiers are afflicted with after they come back from the battlefield. We have PTSD as a biggie. We found just recently that there was a clinical trial going on up in Colorado where they are experimenting with Lactobacillus rhamnosus to tamp down on stress levels and to increase levels of oxytocin in these soldiers to make them more socially outgoing. and maybe cure some of their quote-unquote mental disorder. Well, guys, it has gone way above and beyond that. We found out DARPA, with their Biological Technology Office, more affectionately known as the BTO, has been doing all kinds of research into creating and experimenting with microbes and crossing the lines between biology and technology, able to flip switches and use technology such as CRISPR to create these little biofactories, these little living machines that they can program and then put inside of a living organism to be able to do their bidding. Well, guys, it gets way worse than anything that we've looked at to date, if you can even believe it. Anyway, back to this brain initiatives. This is kind of where a lot of this started. I mean, not really started because it's been going on for a very long time, but this is really where this invasion of the brain has started. From a microbial level, we know that they've been messing around with trying to come up with different forms of mind control, even as far back as the MKUltra project with the CIA. That is documented. That is not fantasy. We also found out that there's been all kinds of research using microwaves and psychotronic weaponry back from, I think we read the 50s, when the U.S. Embassy first discovered that they were detecting microwaves near their embassy in the Soviet Union. They started looking at what the potential different effects of those microwaves could be on the brain and cognition. So this brain initiative is kind of like phase 2. Now it is official. We are researching the brain. Of course, again, all the name of trying to cure diseases and cure deficits. Remember, we have this Alzheimer's epidemic as well. So Nana doesn't remember who little Johnny is anymore, but don't worry about it. I'm going to find a way to fix that, Nana. All you got to do is step right up for this clinical trial. The officially stated goal of the Brain Initiative was to, quote, generate an array of physical and conceptual tools needed to determine how healthy brains function over the lifespan of humans and other organisms, and then to develop a workforce to create and implement these tools aimed at establishing a more comprehensive view of how thoughts, memories, actions all emerge from the dynamic activities in the brain. Now remember, there's another facet to this, and this is this reverse engineering of the brain. Once they are able to understand how neurons grow and proliferate and work together and store memories and control our biological functions, our hormones, our brain chemicals, communicate with our organs and all the other things that make us human, they will be able to create a synthetic version of this brain that then they can use to model their artificial intelligence, pulsating synthetic versions to run the show. Remember, there is a lot happening in AI, and maybe we will get to that piece of this puzzle today, maybe tomorrow. But I have a good 20 articles lined up between last week and some of the stuff that has come out this weekend. It's pretty much going to blow your mind. So anyway, back to this Brain Initiative. While this initiative is aimed at civilian and health applications, remember, AI doctor smartphone is coming to a device near you. In precision medicine, we found out the head of Precision Medicine Initiative just announced that because it saved his life, having his genome sequenced to determine this kind of cancer and target appropriate therapies, we now, the American public, are going to be the beneficiaries of this new 21st century medicine. Which, of course, they passed the 21st Century Cures Act back in December of 2016. As part of that, the 399S, they have the National Neurological Surveillance System for mental disorders. And good old Tommy Insel, former director of the National Institute of Mental Health in October 2015, went over to Google's Verily division that is doing all kinds of research into how to cure you from what ails you. with some sort of 21st century medicine. Guys, it is really here. This is a very multifaceted plan, but it was all laid out during the term of Obama. And now those little pieces of the puzzle are coming to fruition, even if it's not in the headlines. If you pay attention to some of these little stories that are coming out and you know who all these players are and what all these little pieces mean, the picture that is being painted for us is a very frightening one. And our dystopian future is not too far down the path. While this BRAIN initiative is aimed at civilian and health applications, there is a growing concern by bioethicists such as Jonathan Moreno and other neuroscientists that their research could also be used for military applications that at the very least create some new and challenging ethical dilemmas. Some of these have already been discussed in the 2012 Royal Society report called Brainwave Module 3, Neuroscience, Conflict, and Security. And we also were reading the other day a little excerpt from a book from the U.S. Army College titled The Mind Has No Firewall. That is a big problem. I mean, back originally when that story was written back in the 80s, they were talking about psychotronic weaponry, being able to influence thoughts and behavior by using radio frequency spectrum. But now we are also, with the advent of CRISPR and the discovery of how probiotics and microbiota influence our behavior, our moods, our brain chemicals, our health, our immune system, many other facets of our actual living being, it's become even more frightening because there's a back door to getting to your brain, and that is at the smallest levels of life. Anyway, back to the story. So this Royal Society report back in 2012 was titled Brainwaves Module 3, Neuroscience, Conflict, and Security. The ethical concerns of neuroscientists are also grounded in some previous government efforts to research quote-unquote mind control during the Cold War. The CIA's MKUltra projecting of 1953 to 1964, which included 149 sub-projects in over 80 research institutions in 3 different countries. And I bet you some of those countries are some of our mad off science offshore countries, were conducted alongside the chemical and biological warfare experiments of the U.S. Army Special Operations Division. Some of this research aimed at the development of quote-unquote truth drugs, psychochemical warfare methods, and even at developing brain implants for remotely controlling the brains of test subjects. And we know that none of that ever ended. They have been working on biochemical warfare and brain implants for quite a long time, of course, again, to cure mental disorders, quote unquote. It'll make Johnny L better. Well, however, at least according to the information in the public domain, nothing with an operational value has been produced in this period. Well, I say bullshit to that. The scientific knowledge of the brain has dramatically increased over the last 60 years. And remember, DARPA has an RFP out looking for someone to develop $30 EEGs to be able to read your brainwaves in a non-invasive fashion. And they want to get it in every school and every home. We also have Regina Duggan, formerly of DARPA and then formerly of Google, now with Facebook's Mysterious Building 8. They're also releasing some brain reading projects to be able to type on Facebook without ever having to touch a keyboard. Yeah, let that be something that everyone gets on board with. And in the meantime, they'll be taking those scans, which science has discovered are as individualistic as a fingerprint. And at one point in the past, we had read a story about how maybe in the future they will be able to use brain scan prints as biometric data. Biometrics is another thing we haven't talked about in a while. Maybe we'll get there at some point in the not too distant future. I hope again, because that is coming as well as we give up different pieces of our biological puzzle by just checking that box, giving that swab, giving that sample for them to get into the electronic medical records database that is going to be fueling all of this precision medicine initiative. As the Royal Society report pointed out, there are two different goals of national security neuroscience research. One is called performance enhancement, ding, and the other one is called, like I said, always a double-edged sword, performance degradation. And that would be the weaponization of some of these brain technologies. The current emphasis seems to be on performance enhancement through the development of psychopharmaceuticals and brain stimulation methods that increase alertness, reduce stress, and enable the warfighter or intelligence analyst to make better judgments. Methods for monitoring the brains of soldiers, such as, EEGs, built into helmets, could be used by commandeers to understand their mental state or to automatically alert soldiers that they are about to fall asleep, or also flag threats that are registered by their subconscious. On the horizon are brain-computer interfaces, more affectionately known as BCIs, that will enable new neuroprosthetics and potentially thought-controlled weapon systems. Well, I'm sure some of Regina Duggan's research might be applied to some of that as well. Hey, if you could type on a keyboard with your mind, why wouldn't you be able to control a joystick? Much less is known about the military's efforts for developing methods that can degrade the mental performance of the enemy. The aforementioned National Research Council report suggests, quote, the neurotechnology degradation market segment is completely underground with only speculative information that is available. The report stresses, quote, this cognitive weapons market does exist. There are obvious reasons why governments tend to keep this kind of research very secret. Hence, with big investments in Israel and any neuroscience research that even remotely sounds like quote-unquote mind control carries a social stigma. Researchers and government agencies do not want to be associated with that label. Of course they don't. And research most likely requires ethically controversial human experimentation, which could not pass the muster of ethics review. And finally, the effectiveness of some approaches might be substantially reduced if adversaries had knowledge of them, and thus they could employ effective countermeasures like their electro-deflecto. That just cracks me up. At the very same time, I hope it works. I don't know. I think we better do some experiments. At the very same time, it will not be possible to keep neuro weapons completely secret and out of reach of adversaries for very long. And we already found out that it was announced that Russia was working on their zombie gun to be able to do things to your head to potentially maybe even make some of the people who are targets want to eat brains. So it would be better for national security, maybe. Would it be better for national security to have a more open discussion about it or not? So let's talk about some of these enhancement technologies. These would be for things such as the quote-unquote super soldier program to be able to boost the cognitive and observational abilities of the soldier in the battlefield while connecting them back to the big pulsating brain at Operation Central Command Com. Weapons developers see the warfighter as the increasingly weakest link in the kill chain. Look out, soldier, you will be replaced by robots one day. Humans have a fragile physical body and mind. They need water, food, and sleep in regular intervals, God forbid. And now, Up until now, very little could be done to overcome these puny human limitations. 3 approaches seem to be particularly promising in terms of neuroscientific human enhancement. One is neuropharmacology. Another is brain stimulation. And the third, Johnny, look out, our brain-computer interfaces. And I got a story that really kind of scares me about these. Looks like they're going to be speeding up the brain-computer interface surgeries with the use of robotics here in the future. One thing that just flashed in my mind as I read the neuropharmacology, I remember at one point with one of my friends, we were looking at MREs, and they were old MREs somewhere. I think they might have been for sale on eBay or something, but in some of those really old MREs, they used to put tablets of some drug in there that was like a brain stimulant. Of course, that would be if it was a really dire situation and the shit was hitting the fan. And if you fell asleep, you might die, Johnny, because the enemy is afoot. And so they put these drugs, and I don't remember what they were, but look it up. I'm sure it's out there somewhere in some article about the old school MREs. But they used to put some brain-boosting chemical or pill in there. So it doesn't look like that has ended. Neuropharmacology. Neuroscientists have gained over the last decades an excellent understanding of brain chemistry, which now they're spinning out to the 21st century, which has already led to the development of many new psychotropic drugs such as Prozac. And researchers now hope to not only cure depression and other quote-unquote mental disorders, which of course now occurs on a spectrum. Good old Tommy Incel is working on that with his doctor's smartphone applications and some of his gut bacteria that might fix your problems, but to ultimately enhance mental capabilities through so-called nootropic drugs. Better computer models based on new methods of neuroimaging could enable researchers to better predict the effects of certain drugs on the brain, and that would be the body on a chip, I would bet. Greater precision of drug delivery to specific areas of the brain could also produce very precise neuropsychological and behavioral effects. And we found out that they were using little microbes and little micro machines and little nanobots in your blood to be able to target drug delivery. Of course, it was all in the name of cancer, but they also found with ultrasound that they are able to effectively and non-invasively open up that blood-brain barrier for some of these new 21st century cures to get in there to treat, brain disorders or brain cancers or whatever. We got to get the drugs in there first to be able to effectively treat your gray matter. With greater precision of drug delivery to specific areas of the brain could produce very precise psychological and behavioral effects. But remember, even before that or after that, they are able now to utilize your microbiome to influence your brain as well without ever having to get there through that vagus nerve and that enteric nervous system. Nanotechnologies could potentially deliver drugs across the blood-brain barrier and make drugs more effective. One particularly promising cognitive enhancement drug that is currently being reviewed by several militaries around the world is modafinil. This drug has already been approved by the FDA for treating narcolepsy and sleep disorders. So there you go. It's another one of those drugs to keep the soldiers awake. And it is known under the brand name Provigil. But what makes modafinil especially interesting for the armed forces is its feature of improving alertness and wakefulness instead of merely suppressing tiredness. Other drugs could reduce stress or anxiety and make it thereby less likely that soldiers will suffer from PTSD at a later point. Roger Pittman from Harvard uses a beta blocker, propranolol, for suppressing, if not deleting, ding. Remember, we found out DARPA was working on deleting and inserting memories. Roger Pittman from Harvard uses the beta blocker propranolol for suppressing, if not deleting, painful memories of veterans. It could potentially be administered to soldiers or, anyone else we want to get rid of some bad memories from before they go into action to prevent the latter occurrence of PTSD altogether, which could potentially lead to less behavioral constraints or potentially lead to more aggressive behavior in battle. So they make them better killers and they won't have to remember some of the horror that they inflicted. And then I mentioned before, they found out too, giving them a little L-Reuteri also helps tamp down on some of those stress brain chemicals to keep them mellow after the fact. Psychiatrists have used the electrical stimulation of the brain, and we found out transcranial stimulation is another research project of DARPA. But it has also been used for treating mental illness since the late 19th century. And electroconvulsive therapy, in which an electrical current is applied to the brain through electrodes. I think that's where they kind of crack the skull and with these little paddles. I've seen videos of that. It's very horrifying. They zap the brain internally. It's been widely used since the 40s and the 50s. And the American Psychiatric Association considers it safe and effective for treating major depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorders. Remember, guys, we found out there was an Israeli company that I think their name was Emotive that developed a little mobile app for your cell phone that will allow you to install it and rate your mood just through the sound of your voice when you're talking to friends and family members. And then it gives you a little colorful smiley face or a little dark frowny face to show how your emotions were responding. They have already found out that they can not only diagnose mental disease from the sound and the intonation of your voice, but also physical diseases as well. And good old Tommy Insel is chomping at the bit to get his little grubby hands on some of that technology to be able to diagnose you. Guys, this is going to be ruled out as the economical solution to this healthcare crisis that we are having in America. I can guarantee you that all of the dominoes are lining up to paint a picture of fully invasive surveillance to every level of the human condition. Remember, Google will watch your poop, and they're going to be able to use a special bacteria in a little probiotic, quote unquote, that'll determine whether or not your gut is healthy or not by producing rainbow colored stool. So it'll be easy to diagnose problems. I mean, this really is horrifying. More recent neuroscience researchers have used transcranial stimulation for stimulating the motor cortex, which allows one person in a brain-to-brain interface to remotely control the hand movements of another person. This experiment was successfully carried out at the University of Washington in 2013. Which could be the first step toward a brain-computer interface and synaptic telepathy. Now, we found out they did that with mice, where they were able to connect two brains of mice over the internet so they could send thoughts and remotely control. I don't know if they remotely controlled each other or they just remotely controlled thoughts, but there must have been an action involved for them to be able to know that. I mean, really, guys, our last bastion of freedom, the one organ, if you could call it that makes us who we are, the one thing that you should be guarding more than any piece of your body is your brain. any type of traumatic brain injury could potentially change forever who you were. And the government, the military, and the mad science establishment all want in to the recesses of what makes you you. And they want to be able to monitor it non-invasively in a national surveillance center. I mean, come on, guys. How could this not be any more in your face? Why aren't people flipping out over this? I mean, I would think, if anything, this would be something, regardless of race, religion, or creed, we should be able to all get behind stopping this march forward. Researchers from Arizona State University are working on something called transcranial pulsed ultrasound devices, which can be fitted into a helmet, and it could be used for controlling the mental states of soldiers, as well as boosting their alertness and relieving pain from their injuries. Pulsed ultrasound would also be able to reach deeper regions of the brain. We also found out that pulsed ultrasounds could be used to power those neural dust motes that DARPA has been working on with Berkeley, which would be the Fitbit of the nervous system. This is just nuts, all in the name of being able to monitor soldiers. It is also going to be used to monitor you. The pulsed ultrasound would also be able to reach deeper regions of the brain, and brain stimulation methods could have numerous benefits, of course, in the treatment and enhancement for people across society. And the technology could therefore spread quickly. Open your arms and embrace the machine, is what they are saying. In fact, there are already low-cost transcranial DCS devices called Focus, which are marketed as a gaming device to improve the concentration of computer gamers. Yeah, that's what we need. All right, so if we look at that, and then we go to a book that we had looked at the other day titled Neurorobotics, from brain-machine interfaces to rehabilitation robotics. They talked a lot about DARPA and some of the studies that are DARPA funded between the National Institute of Health and Oxford University, where they're kind of toying with looking at different metabolic ketones and esters to be able to boost the brain energy and the metabolism for glucose to give soldiers quick energy releases while in the battlefield. But one of the other things that they have been focusing on as a potential target would be the long-term enhancement of the microbiome. They call it the enteric nervous system, which is a collection of neurons in the gut, often called the second brain in popular press, which contains 100 million neurons, more than either your spinal cord or your peripheral nervous system. Approximately 90% of the nerve fibers in this visceral nerve, called the vagus, carry information directly from the gut to the brain, not the other way around. Recent evidence supports the view that signals from the gut directly affect our emotions, our decision-making, our response to stress, our immune response, and our learning and memory response. Remember, DARPA was working with zippity zapping and trying to increase memory, increase fast learning, and be able to upload your learning to the cloud. The enteric microbiome of non-human organisms living in the human gut is thought to impact our cognitive performance and our emotional resilience. and our behavior, of course. A recent study showed that mice receiving Lactobacillus rhamnosus, and that is another one of the lactobacilli that DARPA has been experimenting with for stress-related PTSD and stuff, shows that mice receiving this were less anxious, performed better on tests for learning and memory, and had lower stress hormones such as cortisol after being exposed to stressful situations. And when they severed the vagus nerve in those poor little mousies, it had an attenuating effect, implying that the bacteria in the gut have a direct effect on the neurotransmitter receptors in the central nervous system in healthy animals and potentially in humans. So what is that brain-gut microbiota axis? There is a published study in Nature Science Direct. The general scaffolding of the brain-gut microbiota axis, more affectionately known as the BGM, includes the central nervous system, the neuroendocrine and neuroimmune systems, the sympathetic and parasympathetic arms of the autonomic nervous system, the enteric nervous system, which is your vagus nerve, and more importantly, the intestinal microbiota. These components interact to form a complex reflex network with afferent fibers that project the integrative central nervous system structures and efferent projections to the smooth muscle. And in this biodirectional communication network, signals from the brain can influence your motor, sensory, and secretory, as in secretionary modals of the gut. And conversely, visceral messages from the gut can influence brain function. Less extensively studied but increasingly appreciated is the potential impact of the enteric microbiota on brain function. The gut microbiota consists predominantly of bacteria, but also contains archaea, protozoa, fungi, and viruses, all which have co-evolved within the human host. These microorganisms, we found out there are like 8 different bacterial colonies living in different regions of our body, battling it out every single day. And they influence our behavior, our health, and our bodily function on a daily basis. So knowing all of this, these microorganisms provide vital functions which are essential for the host's health, including our food processing, our digestion of indigestible polysaccharides, as well as our synthesis of vitamins, and the inhibition of pathogens, keeping the good microbiota fighting the bad bacteria. So a story came out of Scientific American back in April, and I don't think people realize how much of a direct connection what we ingest has to not only our physical makeup and our gut makeup, but our actual DNA makeup, that DNA strand that makes you who you are. And here we are having the mainstream consumer Bernaysian-inspired system that advertises processed food as being quick and easy. So, mommy and daddy can both work, and little Johnny can go to school all day and be in daycare and become a part of the system without your involvement. When he comes home, he got a convenient TV microwavable dinner in non-BPA safe plastic dinner tray for ease of feeding him. But guess what? Diet can change your DNA. Recent studies suggest that the food you eat can modify your genes, and not only your genes, but potentially your future children's. Nutritionalists have long known that, quote unquote, you are what you eat. And it is not just an expression. Recent studies suggest that what you eat affects you and sometimes even your grandchildren, your children and your grandchildren. Put down the Cheetos, Johnny. This winter, Nestle has a big bio section of their business. We covered them at one point, looking at probiotics and such. This winter, Nestle convened esteemed experts in human and animal health to talk about the future of nutrition science. Yeah, that's what that division is called. One theme to emerge was the epigenetic impact of diet and lifestyle on individual health. And remember, once you give that DNA swab and they sequence you, that was one of the things that we found out long ago when we started looking at epigenetics, is how things that you've done, even stress that you've had in your life, and whether or not you've lived on a low income or eaten junk food, can potentially affect future generations. And as they are looking at our human defects in our DNA strands, they could potentially in the future decide that maybe you're too damaged, Johnny, to reproduce, or look, you have too many defective genes. Maybe you need to take one of these new CRISPR probiotics that'll go in and zip, 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 zip and unzap, zip and unzip, not zap, some of your little DNA strands and correct those defects, Johnny. Oh, yes, yes, yes. And then we will allow you to reproduce. Epigenetics is a study of how different biological and environmental signals affect genome expression. And rather than change DNA itself, epigenetic signals can, for example, prompt changes in the number of methyl chemical groups attached to a gene by turning it on or off. Ding! A person's diet is an important source of epigenetic signals, and scientists are now investigating how eating habits may modify gene expression in adults and their offspring. Understanding that relationship could help researchers identify nutritional elements that might help prevent or treat diseases such as obesity, diabetes, coronary heart disease, cancer, and Alzheimer's. You are what you eat, and food is medicine. At the Nestle Research Center in Lausanne, Switzerland, more than 550 scientists, research assistants, and technical drive scientists all are meeting from businesses worldwide, and this includes exploring the relationship between diet and human health. Epigenetics is becoming progressively more important to this work, and it is critical to understand the role of nutrition in transgenerational health. Ding, 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 ding. Particularly between mother and child. Eugenics in your future. Don't eat the junk food because we're gonna know. Give us your DNA swab and we're gonna tell you. I mean, this is really horrifying. So this goes on and on. I'll link to this story because I want to get to some of the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to talk to you about today. All right, so we've been talking a lot about someone that we have come to learn a lot about, and he is involved in so many projects in so many ways, and he has these tentacles spread in a lot of different businesses and university projects and even some mad sciencey projects where the scientists are doing experiments on themselves and then calling for his professional oversight to their unapproved genetic projects. And that would be good old Georgie Porgy Church. Well, I was surprised to see a story come out just the other day from Business Insider doing a little mini expose on good old Georgie Church. This story was titled, "A Scientist Named George Church Has a Wild Idea to Upend Evolution, and Here is What You Should Know About Him." So somebody is getting the picture. Good old Business Insider. Thank you, Sharon Begley. of Stats. This looks like they might have republished this from Stat News, May 20th, 2017. Harvard biologist George Church burst into the headlines yet again last week when he helped organize a closed-door meeting of scores of top scientists to discuss accelerating efforts to create synthetic DNA, including a complete synthetic human genome. They are considering launching a decade-long drive to build from scratch all the genes that make us human. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. Don't forget that, again, is going to be used at some point to be able to create synthetic humans and superhumans and everything else. This meeting raised all sorts of ethical questions, but that's nothing new for Georgie Porgy Church. He has been stirring controversy and excitement in the scientific community for decades. He wants to reanimate, and this is part of this de-extinction project, the woolly mammoth. He's also editing pig genes, working with DARPA and MIT to make them humanized, so then we can grow organs in them to use for transplants for humans that need some sort of organ transplant. Oh, and he is working on reversing aging. It says he's also involved in one of the co-founders of the Brain Initiative and working with DARPA on making biofactories at the Weiss Institute, as well as many other things. So who is Georgie Porgy Church? Well, he is the Harvard biologist who has become as famous for his Stephen Colbert appearances, which I haven't seen any of those. Might have to look them up on YouTube, as well as for looking like Charles Darwin, Santa Claus, or God, depending on your bent. As for his many seminal scientific discoveries. So who is he most like, Darwin or who knows? Darwin explained how species evolve. Church wants to turbocharge that process by putting new genes into organisms rather than waiting around for them to evolve on their own. And remember, that he called human-directed evolution. That is human 2.0. For instance, he is using CRISPR, ding-a-ling-a-ling, which he won the patent for and was quite important in the development of CRISPR, a revolutionary genome editing technology he helped develop to alter 62 pig genes, ding ding, which might allow their organs to be transplanted into humans without being rejected. We also read a story way back when about some of the work that Georgie Church had been doing with E. coli bacteria and rewriting that genome. There was a study out of Nature, radically rewritten bacterial genome unveiled. The altered E. coli represents the most extensive re-engineering yet of an organism's genetic code. Synthetic biologists report the most far-reaching rewiring yet of a bacterial genome, and this feat, which was described in Science back in August of 2016, involved repurposing 3.8% of the base pairs of the genome of E. coli bacterium. The scientists replaced 7 of its 64 genetic codons, which are the sequences that code for amino acids, with others that produce the same components, and they were able to reduce the number of codons by synthesizing the DNA in 55 fragments. They have yet to reassemble those pieces, though, into a functioning E. coli, but I bet they have since last August. Despite that, the team, led by researchers at Harvard Medical School in Boston, say that is a major step in the push to engineer organisms with new properties, such as resistance to infection by viruses. The synthetic biologists, including who? Oh, George Church at Harvard, reported their results in the August 18, 2016 Science publication. They say that the work also serves as a prototype for the Human Genome Project, in which scientists aim to synthesize a human genome. This demonstration shows that the kind of radical re-engineering that we're looking to do is feasible, says Georgie Porgy Church. Now, save that memory about Georgie Porgy Church and radically changing for the very first time a bacterial genome. He'll come up again here in the not too distant future. So he's working on that. He's working on all these other things. For instance, he's using CRISPR to alter those pig genes to make the cells humanized. He's also got a little bit of Santa in him, they say, bringing the gift of his imagination to many private companies where he acts as advisor, co-founder, and consultant. And he'll have to list that on his conflict of interest slide when he's doing presentations. And as for his divinity, well, not yet. But he's embarked on efforts to resurrect the dead, in this case, woolly mammoths, and smite the living. This would be the mosquitoes that carry malaria, ding, and other diseases with disease-causing pathogens, using a technique that good old Billy Gates is invested in, and that's called the gene drive. Indeed, he is known for subsisting for months, just drinking cell line broth, which is pretty disturbing. And he has done all kinds of discoveries. In 1978, when he was a student at Duke University, he helped determine the three-dimensional structure of RNA. In the 1980s, he helped develop the actual DNA sequencing, which made Church think of himself as more of an engineer than a biologist. In 2013, Church raced a former junior scientist in his lab to make CRISPR work in humans and other mammalian cells. And that was just months after Jennifer Doudna, we talked about her at Berkeley, had CRISPR DNA floating in test tubes. Church co-authored hundreds of scientific papers, from predicting regulons to characteristics of Cas9 guide RNA orthonologs, and that would be his CRISPR-Cas9. So why would he want to create full genomes from scratch? Well, Church has been circumspect about this because he has submitted what is reported to be a blockbuster paper on creating genomes from scratch to the journal Science. He has talked about how building this genome would require creating about 3 billion chemical letters and might eventually be easier than using CRISPR to edit, let's say, a big muscle gene or an HIV/AIDS resistant gene. But remember, there might be other ways to get at that. So plus that and CRISPR'd pigs. Is that enough future projects for him? Well, no, because he's never lost his love for working on DNA sequencing, and he thinks that he is this close to developing cheap handheld sequencers for DNA. And then you'll be able to someday, when someone sneezes all over you, you can whip out your handheld DNA sequencer, catch the spit droplets, and get a readout of whether or not those droplets might contain a cold virus that you might be resistant to, or viruses that you are susceptible to, or then you just wash your hands and face, or it contains a pathogen that might kill you. There are 48 potential gene therapies that are currently in the pipeline in Georgie Porgy Church's lab to reverse aging as well. Church said if he'd like to be, he hasn't said if he'd like to be a guinea pig for this reversed aging technology, but if he is, let's see what happens to his future looks. And yeah, we see Ray Kurzweil. It seems to look like he's getting a little bit younger every time we see him. So who is Georgie Porgy Church? He was born in August of 1954. He's a geneticist, molecular engineer, and a chemist. And as of 2015, he's the Robert Winthrop Professor of Genetics at Harvard Medical School and a professor of health science and technology at Harvard and MIT. He was a founding member of the Weiss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering at Harvard. And as of March 2017, he also serves, and this has got to get you, as a member of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists Board of Sponsors. Ding, ding, ding. CRISPR is a WMD. Remember that. So what has he been doing in synthetic biology and genome editing? He has developed genome engineering technology since 1997, and since 2004, he has developed the use of DNA array synthesizers. He co-developed something called MAGE, which is a multiplex automated genome engineering, and he optimized CRISPR-Cas9, which was discovered by Jennifer Doudna. His laboratory's use of CRISPR in human-induced pluripotent stem cells is the latest contender for precise gene therapy. Well, guys, I'm going to tell you what. CRISPR now directs genome evolution of probiotic bacteria. Yes, I said it. CRISPR in your probiotics on all the new packages. Now, with probiotics and CRISPRing, technology does not fall under the guise of GMO. Careful what you ask for. And I guess that's where we're going to leave it today. That's where we're going to pick up for tomorrow. Lots of great radio live up next month.
My name is S.M. Gibson, and I am the host of Anti-Media Radio on UCY.